Gone 10:30. Can I just welcome everyone to the September meeting of the Children, Young People and Lifelong Learning Committee, and could I remind everyone that the meeting will be recorded and subsequently made available for public listening. Nick, do you have any Sederunt apologies?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we have 26 members present, 2 apologies, the apologies being from Councillor McGregor and from Jeanette Wilson.
Before we start the meeting, while I still remember, just to let people know, it would normally be Lucy who would be the clerk for the committee, but she had a baby boy after the EIC meeting last week. I can't promise this meeting will be as exciting as that, but just to send out congratulations to Lucy and what the baby's name?
Isaac.
Isaac. Baby Isaac. So we just send our congratulations to them. Okay, so do we have any declarations of interest? No. Okay, so if we move on to item 3, the minute of the meeting of 29th of June for approval. Is everybody happy with that? Dick?
Yeah, just on page 9 of the papers, it refers to the 17 Education Government's Next Steps Scottish Government publication. Is it accurate? Because it says there we should have a report to this meeting today on that. So I wonder if it's where that's going, because it's a very important document.
Colin?
Sorry, can I clarify a matter first, please? Thanks, Gillian.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for that. The fair funding consultation response was going to form the paper for next steps, but further to the COSLA meeting on Friday and subject to the briefing for the COSLA leaders meeting on the 29th, we have not been able to bring a paper to this meeting.
I think it's a very important document, this, because it's going to shape education for the next decade, probably. So could we have a special meeting and seminar on this, because it is an important document?
It's going to be a formal response, effectively, from all the local authorities. That was agreed at the CIPL Education Young People's meeting on Friday. That's subsequently going to go to the leaders meeting on the 29th. I think probably we could have a paper come back to our committee in November, which will contain the contents of the briefing.
I think, Chair, if I could also add, I think it's a good idea that we might also have a seminar. I think the complication at the moment is there's been so much uncertainty in the air nationally. A lot of that, and the following the Next Steps publication, there was a very clear timeline that was anticipating quite a bit of movement and a bit more concrete information by the end of this month. Nationally, there have been national meetings going on, and I think what will be helpful is that by about November, December, we're likely to have a lot more clarity about things like regional collaboratives, etc. That's been worked on at a national level, and if we're able to have a member seminar that's able to give you concrete information on decisions, we always felt that would be better than speculating, because there's been a lot of speculating so far.
Thank you. There has been a members' seminar scheduled for the 2nd of November, and I'm happy to make that the priority item for that seminar.
Okay, so if we move on to item 4, early learning and childcare planning for the expansion towards 1140 hours. Members will recall that there was a paper came to the June meeting of this committee, and we subsequently asked officers to go back and consult with the PVI sector as well and bring forward additional options. So I think the Director wants to speak about recommendation 2.4, note that all options for expansion of early learning and childcare provision will require Scottish Government funding to be cost neutral. I think, Colin, you want to go into some detail about that?
Yes, thanks, Chair. Paul Garrett, our Head of Finance, was particularly keen and made a particular request that I clarify what 2.4 means. In practice, he felt that he wouldn't want members to have any misunderstanding around that. So what we're saying here is that we have got guaranteed funding for year one. We know how much that is, and we have a plan in place. What we're asking you to agree today is the service delivery plan that takes us into years 2, 3 and 4, and the methodology around the phasing, etc. That plan will then go to the government. If that plan is fully funded, we'll continue and implement the plan as indicated. If the government are not able to fully fund the plan that we've set out, then it may be necessary to revisit the plan and the methodology.
Just on the back of that, at Friday's meeting, that was the feeling of all local authorities, that it had to be fully funded, that individual local authorities can't afford to subsidise this by any means. So, Liz, I think you want to give some introduction to this.
Thank you. The government policy is to increase the entitlement from 600 hours to 1140 hours of early learning and childcare by session 2020-21. Our role is to phase in early access to 1140 hours over 4 years, adhering to the criteria set by the Scottish Government. This will mean changes to current delivery models to offer families increased flexibility and choice in accessing provision. In planning for the expansion and proposing options, provision has been mapped using data which incorporates registered capacity, physical capacity, historical data, and projected birth rates. It also takes cognizance of parental views for future provision and takes account of the parental survey that was conducted in July. Consideration has also been given to the views of the PBI sector through the Childcare Partnership, and consideration has been given to the views of managers in school nurseries. 3 options are proposed which give consideration to quality, workforce, accessibility, flexibility, and affordability. All options for expansion of early learning and childcare provision will require Scottish Government funding to be cost neutral. We are aware of the issues raised by the PBI sector. These issues permeate all options for phasing. The report asks members to agree a preferred option for phasing and agree a series of forthcoming actions. So we have the 4 recommendations: to agree the service delivery plan for the expansion of early learning and childcare based on phasing, which takes account of the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation through a cluster approach, which is option 2, as detailed in section 3.4 and 3.5 of the report. Also, to agree to an increase of the hourly rate from £4.20 to £4.78 for 2-year-olds from the beginning of the school session 2017, referenced in paragraphs 312 to 316. And to agree to a full review of the associated support to funded providers, including the hourly rate, not by March, but by January, so that we come back to the CIPL committee in January with that, ready for next year's budget setting, and following consultation through the Childcare Partnership. And to note all options for expansion, as indicated earlier, that will require Scottish Government funding to be cost neutral. The current provision for early learning and childcare is during the school day, in term time only. 62% of our provision is provided in school nurseries. The PBI sector can offer extended days and all year round provision, and provide 19% of the provision is in the private sector and 18% in the voluntary sector. However, in future provision, the parental survey indicated that the majority of parents, that was 90%, want to take their entitlement in a school nursery during the school day, based on this is what they know, this is what they're used to. However, there was also a demand for before and after school provision and during the school holidays. Taking into account the parental survey and the mapping exercise, this is likely to change by 2020, as some schools may be able to offer an extended day, meaning 8 a.m. till 6 p.m, to families, and some may offer all year round provision, that's 49 weeks, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. The model of delivery will depend on demand and proximity of other providers. The guidelines indicate that the phased investment in early learning and childcare should take account of SIMD, with 39% of eligible children in local authority nurseries and funded providers living in SIMD deciles 1 to 4. So the options that we are presenting, 3 options which are indicated in your paper. Option one is a cluster approach, which was based on the model that we presented at the last committee. We didn't include the views of the PBI at the last committee, and we were asked to go back and reconsider, which we have done with the PBI. So option one provides early access to children living in deciles 1 to 4, where possible, the exception being where alignment is needed within the capital programme. All providers within a postcode ring-fenced geographical area may offer up to 1140 hours, delivering full flexibility and choice to families. The tables for option one gives an indication of how many children can have early access and the number of percentage of children with early access in each SIMD decile. The early access will be ring-fenced to families and establishments within designated postcodes. So that would mitigate movement of families from one provider to another. Families out with these areas, the geographical areas, will continue to receive their statutory requirements of 600 hours in a provider of their choice. Families can't transfer early access to increased hours to providers who are in a later phase of expansion. So only the people, the children and families with the postcodes and the providers in that postcode can offer or access the early access. Option 2, the SIMD cluster approach. Again, this takes the views of the private providers in moving Dumfries to the later stages of implementation. And that provides early access for children living in SIMDs 1 to 4 where possible, again with the exception of the capital, where it aligns with the capital programme. And again, all providers within a postcode ring-fenced geographical area will offer 1140 hours, delivering full flexibility and choice. Again, the table shows the percentage of children gaining early access and the percentage of children in SIMDs 1 and 2. This model is more cost-effective than the previous model. Option 3. Option 3 is an incremental approach, increasing hours on an annualized basis for eligible children. That indicates the number of hours in each phase that the children can have access. The SIMD, this would allow all children early access in phases 2, 3 and 4. The 14% in phase 1 takes account of the trial in Penningham and Minigaff and Kellerholm and Sanker, which have already started to deliver 1140 hours. However, this approach doesn't follow the government planning guidance. An incremental approach doesn't give access, doesn't prioritise children in SIMD deciles 1 to 4 who stand to benefit most from early access. It does, however, give everybody access to some. The incremental approach requires a significant increase in workforce. We anticipate an increase of 150 qualified staff by August 2018, which this model incurs greatest costs and associated risks regarding practicalities, staff and the space available, capacity available. Summarising the options, option 1 and 2, as indicated, follow the guidelines for SIMD. All options have been considered in relation to quality, workforce accessibility and affordability. In terms of quality, Option 1 allows for lessons to be learnt. If we were to do an incremental approach, then we wouldn't learn from any mistakes, or in fact we wouldn't be able to make adaptations according to what was practically possible or impossible. The workforce is the biggest issue. Option 1 and 2 requires an incremental increase in workforce and aligns with the training capacities available within Dumfries and Galloway, and it also allows for the staff who are undertaking the BA in childhood practice to qualify. Option 3 has an increase in staffing requirements for phase 2, and we don't believe that we could be ready. We would be ready for the workforce by 2018. And there is a further risk to that in option 3, that there could be staff movement from the private to the voluntary sector. Accessibility and flexibility. Option 1 and 2 provide a range of service delivery models and provide full flexibility and choice within that geographical area. Option 3 does increase the hours to families, but it is likely that parents' expectations will not be met in relation to a time and place of their choosing to access the 1140 hours. In terms of affordability, the Scottish Government planning guidance assumes that plans will aim to improve affordability for parents alongside creating a financially sustainable service model which makes the most effective use of the public funds. Option 2 is the most cost-effective model, with option 3 being the most expensive. So option 2 presents the lowest cost value whilst meeting the expectations of the planning guidance. All options have the same level of capital funding requirement, and phasing needs to be cost-effective and provide best value according to the Scottish Government planning guidance, and that will be the criteria which they will use to set which funding we will actually receive. So capital investment within each area, the capacity shortfall across local authority and PVI sectors has been calculated, which is indicated below, which doesn't take account of the increased nursery provision in respect of the Learning Town. Option appraisals are still being considered by the Simple Project Board to test against the full life costs, revenue funding, affordability across options for each location. All 3 phasing options considered by officers assume the same capital solutions. We have already secured the funding for this year, and the remaining funding has yet to be determined. The service delivery plan does remain on schedule at the moment, pending on the decision today, and it needs to be submitted to the Scottish Government by the 29th of September. We also have been involved in the consultation and engagement with stakeholders, continues to be a priority, and we have met on several occasions with the Childcare Partnership and indeed with the head teachers and managers of school nurseries. And this will continue as we expand the programme. The expansion issues have caused some concerns with PVI relating to sustainability in terms of, and we are trying to support that in terms of advance payments to support providers in managing cash flow, and a suggestion that the hourly rate is an issue. While we pay 42 pence more for the hourly rate for 3 to 4 year olds, we know that we pay 58 pence less for 2 year olds. And it's outlined in section 310 to 316, the hourly rates that we've done a little bit of research across the other authorities to look at the sliding scale. So that's why we know that we are paying less for our 2 year olds. So in conclusion, whilst the way forward for the expansion of early learning childcare is no doubt challenging for us all, in order to progress, it is imperative that we can agree a way forward today. It's recognised by the Scottish Government that the service delivery plan will be a working document and subject to change as more information becomes available. Therefore, I ask you to agree to the recommendations outlined in the report.
Thank you, Liz. Members?
I haven't got my plate in front of me, my apologies. It's in relation to the table on paragraph 323, where it mentions the 62% of provision is provided by local authority school nurseries and the remainder by the private and voluntary sector. Of that 62%, what percentage of funding does that accumulate? What percentage of funding goes to the local authority compared to the 62% provision? That's one point. And also, one of the recommendation at 2.3 about the review, I note you mentioned, the report says it's March 2018, but you're suggesting it comes forward to January to be part of the budget setting provision. I understand that there's a real concern in the private sector that some of them may not be in business by that time. Could you define the type of support that you're saying? You mentioned to help with cash flow position. More information on what that is and the level of funding that's going to go forward. The review that's going to come forward in January 2018, can we have an assurance that that will be an open book review, that the private providers will be able to put the books down in front of you and show what the true cost of their running is? Also, will the council come forward and show what the true cost of running a council authority is, so that there be a comparison like for like?
Liz?
Yeah, thank you. In terms of the split of the cost between the council and the private sector, I don't have those numbers specifically to hand just now, but I can get that to you. But I think it has been recognised in kind of national reports that the cost of local authority provision is more expensive than the private sector. And the prime driver for that is the living wage and the local authorities' pension obligations as well. So one would expect that and it will come through the open book review that you're talking about, your fourth point you made there regarding transparency, regarding the costs and stuff like that. So there have been national studies carried out, and as I say, we'll furnish you information, but you'd expect the council sector to be more expensive. Regarding the open book approach, then we have been looking at the level of data that we can provide, and I think it's been agreed that that would be shared on both sides. So the council would be quite open in terms of its costs and its staffing and its wage rates and stuff like that. And I think the requirement would be for a timious presentation of the PBI and voluntary sector to get the same information in, because obviously there'll be a bit of analysis required, and that would have to be more than just high-level costs. It would need to get into the finer detail regarding staffing ratios and staff pay rates and stuff like that, so that there can be a useful comparison carried out.
Ivor?
Chair, I'm not too sure if, I think it might be in next week's papers to full council about the policies of this administration, but the last administration went forward with the view that if we were looking to get providers for the elderly, they would be funded to the cost of making sure that they could pay the living wage. It may be different under this administration, whereby that policy may be dropped, because if we're not paying enough to the PVI sector to allow them to pay their staff the living wage, then that would cause me a little bit of concern that we're treating one lot of workers one way and another lot of workers the other way.
Yeah, I think in 317, the Scottish Government report on the living wage is expected in March 2018, so obviously that will cover that aspect of it. And I think that's part of the uncertainty in terms of how much money the Scottish Government are going to pay in the hourly rate.
Chair, but currently, we do it for one sector of the people that we employ, which is outside providers for elderly care. Now, surely outside providers for childcare should receive the same amount as or be based on the same principles, but that might have been dropped from this administration's actual policies. I don't know, but we'll find that out next week.
Chair, I understand that the decision around living wage for the elderly workers was followed a full open book exercise with providers. So obviously that hasn't yet happened with the childcare providers. And we, at the moment, would want to encourage that exercise to take place. We can't demand that it takes place. We would like to see that happening, and we have a full open book on both sides, analysis of the financial picture, and that be brought to you in January.
Aaron, you want to go on?
Thanks, Chair. Just to add to that, the government have announced through a policy update that they are putting money aside to support the living wage allocation within the early years settings. Now, the challenge with that is, in comparison, we pay an hourly rate per child, and that child could be within a ratio of 1 to 8 or 1 to 5. So the intricacies of how that's worked out towards the living wage is quite challenging. But there is a commitment to ensure that that happens. And within the procurement route for private providers, there's a statement that ensures the living wage is paid to all staff within that provider. And to allow that to happen, we obviously have to ensure that the rate we give across marries up with that.
Thanks, Chair. I'm looking for an explanation for question 12 in the appendix. It's page 26. Now, the response there indicates an overwhelming preference for school nurseries. But when you study the figures, there are actually marginally more respondents have indicated a preference for a combination of private day nurseries and childminders. So could someone please explain the statistics to me, please?
Rosie?
Okay, thank you for your question. I think that indicates that several families will use, or more than several families will use more than one provider. So there are a number of families who are taking a blended approach and will have children in, we call it a split placement. So they'll spend part of the week with one provider and part of the week with another, or similarly part of a day with one provider, and then perhaps be picked up, for example, by a childminder. So, as I say, some families will use more than one provider, which I hope will answer the question.
So, is it really an expression of preference or an expression of current usage?
I think the question asked for an expression of preference, and so I think that indicates that folk would want to use more than one provider. Yeah.
Right. I have no one else indicating they want to speak, so can we move to the recommendations? There we go. Can we agree 2.1, which is option 2? Yep, agreed. And can we agree 2.2 to increase the hourly rate, the increased hourly rate, £4.78 for 2-year-olds from the beginning of school session 2007? Agreed? Yep. And can we agree 2.3, the full review? That will come to the January meeting of this committee to allow for the budget process. Agreed? And can we note 2.4, the fact that this will have to be fully funded by the Scottish Government? Thank you. So if we move to item 5 on page 33. This is the Educational Governance Authority Annual Plan 2017. This report provides members with the annual improvement plan for education services. It's a summary of actions for all schools over the next school year. To make it useful for our schools and parents, its aim is to be short and practical while taking account of this Council plan and the Children's Services Plan. The plans are required under the Education Scotland Act and needs to be submitted to Government in September of each year. I note that it says that it should be submitted to ministers by the 1st of September, but but they are aware that this is going to come late, and they're in agreement with this. So, Gillian, you speak to this?
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. In June, pardon me. In June, members received a report and requested a further report to be brought back here, and as Councillor Brodie picked up, that report was in two parts. The first part was in response to this, the Education Scotland Act and the expectation for the report. The second part of that was in relation to regionalisation and fair funding, and that's the part of the report that will come back in November. However, this is the report which sets out our response to the Standards in Scotland Schools Act. So it's a relatively short one-year plan. The audience is predominantly schools, and this will set the agenda for school improvement, and it will also form the year one actions of our education services part of the Directorate business plan. It takes account of the national priorities for raising attainment for all, literacy and numeracy, health and wellbeing, positive destinations and closing the gap. And it has a clear focus in outcomes for those children who live in more deprived areas. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Members, Adam?
Thanks, Chair. I think that this, mostly is a good plan, but I failed to notice anything relating to looked after children or, young carers. I was just wondering if we could get an explanation for that.
Gillian?
Certainly within the plan there is an assumption, and it's not explicit, absolutely. I think we could be more explicit within that, but there is an assumption that all young people who need targeted support will be given that support, and that will include youngsters from areas of deprivation, looked after children and young carers. There is a reference to it within the council plan, but it certainly will be made clear to all schools that that's our expectation.
Maybe also reassure that those issues, excuse me, those issues that you've highlighted do feature heavily in the Children's Services Plan. And of some significant prominence. And in fact, at Children's Services Executive Group this morning, we had a presentation on the carer strategy. So we're very much cited on that.
I think it would be good if either here or a future meeting we just make sure that that's explicit in the report.
Again, I think when we come back with the actual business plan and the performance plan, you will see that is very explicit. So we'll take that on board.
No, just clarification on the lead officer initials are quite clear there. What does employability mean? I'm looking at 6.7 in the page 53.
Yes, thank you. The appendix of the appendix, if I may, is very much an operational plan so that schools can see who is responsible in my team for the specific elements. And employability are the employability team at DG TAP. So though they're colleagues within the council, they are specifically within the Employability and Skills Directorate.
Right, well, no one else indicate they want to speak, so can we move to recommendations? Can we note 2.2? And can we agree 2.3? Thank you. So if we move on to item 6 on page 55, which is the Children, Young People and Lifelong Learning Services Budget 2017-18, and we have Colin to speak to this. Colin, is there anything you want
to add? Excuse me, sorry. The position for the ABB is a recognition of bringing the service together for this financial year, and is quite a detailed document to appreciate the size of the service. It's quite difficult to talk through each specific case, but I'm more than happy to answer any relevant questions members would have.
Members? Right. Okay, that's fine. Okay, so can we move the recommendations? As you say, Colin, it is a very detailed document. So can we, we've reviewed it, and can we agree the Children, Young People and Lifelong Learning Budget 2017-18 is detailed in the appendix? Happy with that? Okay. Thanks, Colin. Right. So if we move on to item 7, Children and Young People and Lifelong Learning Services Revenue Budget Monitoring Report 2017-18. Colin, you want to speak to this one? So is there anything you want to add to the report?
Just briefly, the report is up to projection at the end of the 31st of July 2017, and based on that initial projection, we're reporting a potential break-even position. The key areas are discussed within the report in section 3.4 to 3.15, and Appendix 2 provide details of the agreed savings, and Appendix 3 provides details of the policy development allocation. Again, I'm happy to answer any questions in relation to the report.
Members? Dick?
Yeah, just on page, we've got £103,000 to find in the budget because that's what we're projecting to overspend. 3.3 on page 82 says that the management team are actively reviewing expenditure across the service. What sort of areas of are you looking at, and how confident are that you're going to make that target?
I did my sums on Sunday, and I think that's 1/1400th of the budget. So, Colin, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, it's probably quite a range of different areas we're looking over, just because it's so early in the start of the year. For example, there's some, as we indicate in the report, there's some potential slippage with regards to ERVSs that are cutting towards savings. We've got savings mitigation first and worst case scenario to address that pressure if they're not achieved, but full year after this year they'll be achievable. There's also looking at probably like things like vacancy management and stuff like that, how we're recruiting to posts in the short term, long term, ensuring that we do not impact on frontline services, obviously, and just a general view of what's required this year as a one-off saving to offset the short-term pressure. I will say that it is very early in the year, and obviously there is numerous actions within each. It's kind of difficult with each different head of service. They're all individually reviewing their service to ensure that they can do anything that will help offset that pressure, that's only a potential at this moment in time.
Ivor?
Chair, I think in previous years we've seen slightly higher forecasts than this, so it's a reasonably good position for the time of year. Just wondering, will you be looking to identify the measures through each individual area, or will you be looking for environments from one service to another, so education to social work, to balance the books?
We obviously, I ask each of my heads of service to ensure that they manage their own budgets very well, but we recognise it is actually overall one budget, and we are able to wire things across. Where there's more joint working, I suppose, rather than saying at the end of the year that we might wire money from education to social work or the other way around, we're trying to be a bit more proactive than that, and there are a number of budgets that we've now pulled together to ensure that we maybe make better and earlier the right decisions sometimes without worrying about who's going to pick up the cost. So actually, that overall question I think is a really good one. How much benefit are we gaining from that? We're having to try it out gradually and take bits of the budget and put some of that in a pooled basis.
Thank you, Chair. On page 82, 3.9, it states that there's an underspend of 117,000 for adult non-IGB services related to staff vacancies. Can I just check, are those vacancies looking to be filled, or are we not filling those vacancies?
Based on the forecasting that we've provided in here, we're actively looking to recruit them. There is the anticipation, obviously, there'll be a lead in time for advertising, recruitment, and getting a suitable candidate in. So there is built within the forecast anticipation that we will see some individuals coming in within that team.
Jim?
Thanks, Chair. Appendix 3, page 89. I note we have £250,000 to be used for additional, increased learning support provision and building capacity. What does that actually mean on the ground?
Additional staff.
Is it possible to quantify numbers?
I could get that to you. Okay.
As usual, if you can send it to all members of the committee as well. Okay, so I have no other speakers want to come in, so can we move to the recommendations on page 81? Can we note 2.1, 2.2, 2.3 and 2.4? Thank you. So we can move on to item 8 on page 91, which is the Director's End of Year Assessment of the Children, Young People and Lifelong Learning Directorate Business Plan Performance. This is the first full year performance report against the Learning Business Plan 2016-18. Business Plan refresh programme has commenced, and as such the SIPL senior management team are reflecting on the current plan and our progress against the Council's priorities and commitments. The SIPL Directorate will continue to report performance against the business plan at 6 monthly intervals and are working on the most effective way of incorporating local government benchmark framework LGBF data as appropriate. So, Gillian, are you speaking to this?
Chair, can I just mention, first of all, obviously, as the full SIPL Director, it's not just an education report. Therefore, we have Gillian to answer questions on education, Mark's here to answer questions on the lifelong learning, and there are only a small number of KPIs around social work, which I'm prepared to attempt to answer. Okay.
Mark and Gillian, is there anything you want to add to your report? No. In that case, members? Ivor?
Chair, it was with regard to one of the performance indicators that weren't just achieving, the one to do with mobile working and stuff. Just a heads up on that one. If it's anything like the equipment we've got as members, you'll be as well without the equipment, because you'll get on better. The other one was the attainment that we had in was it S5? I noticed that some of the figures there are showing that there's a drop in the number of is it 1+ at level 6 or better by 4% on the year. Hopefully this isn't the fruits of the curriculum for mediocrity, as I once called it at a seminar in here about 6 or 7 years ago, and it's just a blip in the records.
Gillian?
Thank you. Yes, I'm really pleased that the latest and best figures show that at the end of S6, 31% of our young people achieve 5 hires. I think, yes, the S5 has dipped, and we traditionally have looked at 5 hires at the end of S5, so I know people look at that, but what matters for more parents now are the outcomes for the young people when they leave school. We were expecting a small dip in the S5 figures based on the data from S1. So 2 points really, A, curriculum design, and B, the youngsters that were actually in that cohort.
Ivor?
Chair, my understanding is S5 is the more important year because that's the one a lot of universities go on. So I would have more concern that the level of attainment in S5 was dropping. S6 is the additional year they go on and do, but S5 is the more important one for going on to universities and places like that.
Gillian?
Absolutely. In one sitting for some university courses, and I'm absolutely confident for those young people that they are meeting their expectations. We've got to keep an eye on it. We didn't expect the S5 data to be as good as last year based on the cohort of the young people, but I do accept that a lot of universities still consider S5 attainment as their priority. Nationally, that is an issue.
Chair, could I add just to that point as well? We're never complacent, and so where we have been seeing an increase and improvement performance over the last 10 years, effectively, where we see a dip, that we do look quite carefully at that. But I would say that nationally there is a changing pattern around presentation. You probably recognise, perhaps even that some of you will be aware that in your secondary school in your constituency, that in fact quite often we now have S4 to S6 as a single cohort. So there are quite a lot of changes in the patterns and the way in which kids are being presented. More often might have a 2-year a quality 2-year higher now during 5th and 6th year than trying to rush and get a C at the end of 5th year. So there is a bit of a change in pattern, but we don't want to nonetheless ignore the fact that there's been a dip in 5th year. 6th year though are really, really particularly strong, and it will be interesting once we get the national benchmarking on from the Insight tool that looks at latest and best to be able to update you further in due course.
Jim?
Thanks, Chair. Page 117, PDRs. We're still a bit short of the target. Are we improving?
Me, Gillian? Yeah. Yes, we are actually improving. It sounds awful to keep coming back to you with the same message, but the recording of this is the challenge. Every single teacher needs a PDR, or they don't meet the registration. So we know we've got 100% of teachers getting their PDRs, or very, very close to that, unless there's been an absence or whatever. The real complication is that, particularly in education and in social work, you've got a lot of supply staff. You get people coming in and out, people that maybe only working for 1 term. How is that recorded? So we are convinced that it's a recording issue that's preventing us getting up to the sort of 95%, rather than whether people are being well supported and well managed. And we'll continue to work on that agenda. But I'm relatively confident that actually out on the ground, people are getting good management from their own leaders.
Katie?
Thank you, Chair. So picking up on obviously we're picking up on the items that haven't been reached, and one of the items that come up is the stage 2 complaints on page 100 and then detailed in 118. I note that it says, again, you're progressing with recruitment in order to improve on these figures. Can I ask where you are in terms of those recruitment processes?
I understand that Angela's team have recruited. Angela's team have just recruited a bank of casual investigating officers. I think it would be fair to say that the complaints, although relatively small numbers, by the time they come to us, they can be by their nature quite complex, and they can take a significant amount of time to investigate, and quite often they appear at the end of term when some of our officers are due their leave. So it's useful for us to have a bank of people that we can use as and when. Clearly we would want to ensure it was our own team that were managing these investigations, but we now have got a backup plan in case people are on leave. Given the scale of our service and the number of staff, we have 3,500 staff, 20,000 learners, 20 complaints, while clearly we do not want families to have reason to complain to us, 20 complaints is a relatively small number.
David, do you want in?
That was half an hour ago, Chair. Come on. I'd just like to say, Councillor Hislop, I've used my agile working the last couple of days, and if he just waves his hand over the screen and touches the screen sometimes, it's amazing what happens. But I'll not say anything more. My concern on, and fair enough, the report's good, and I've no problem with that. What we don't emphasise enough is the youngsters who don't go to university. Albeit that's the be-all and end-all. And well, I don't think it should be. We should be looking at achievements of youngsters who don't necessarily go to university. What do they achieve? Where do they go? And they may go to university in 10, 15 years' time. But the be-all and end-all is not university when they leave school. And I think I'd like to see a wee bit more concentration on that. That's no disrespect to the report you've given, Gillian, and it's good to see these youngsters achieving like that. But it's probably because I never went to these sort of places that's something to do with it. But my daughters all went to university, and I was dead chuffed with that. And I think people should be. But I think we need to look at the youngsters who don't achieve that level of education, if you like, and where do they go?
Absolutely, and I think that's why I focused on the very positive destination at the end of S6, and also our highest destination figures onto positive futures. So for the highest it's the greatest percentage that I've seen in the recent past. 93% of young people are moving on to positive sustained destinations, whether that be college or university or work, modern apprenticeships. So people are going on to the learner pathway that is right for them, be it college and then university or into the world of work, but absolutely.
Chair, if you wouldn't mind me adding also, again, partly the reason that we haven't been able to look at the figures is that the LGBF data is not available there, but if you look on page 98, we do normally look at the percentage of school leavers who go to a positive destination, and as Gillian says, anecdotal evidence at the moment is it's the highest it's ever been in Dumfries and Galloway, so that's important. And I also think, you know, many of you in driving through Dumfries might have seen the signs around the bridge up at King George V, and there's a lot of emphasis there in terms of us trying to deliver a model across Dumfries and then expanding it beyond. That's more than just about hires and advanced hire.
I concur with Councillor McKee's comments here. I think it's really important that we don't just gauge the performance of schools on higher passes and how many folk get 5As and all the rest of it. But a second query that I'd like to raise is that there's a lot of publicity recently about the pressure that teachers are under, and I know that there's been changes to try and reduce the pressure so that the teachers can do more teaching. It's close to parents' hearts that all students don't have the same aptitude, confidence, and it's really important that teachers have the time to identify quieter children that may lack the confidence, they don't stand out. And have the changes to try and reduce the workload of teachers. It's early days yet, but do you feel that's going to help teachers to have more time to look at and identify quieter children that are underachieving? Because often parents find that that's a big issue for us.
Yeah, there's been a big push around the reducing bureaucracy agenda, and it's appropriate. We as an authority have really tried hard to minimise the requirements of schools in terms of documentation that has to be set in. The difficulty is that in any circumstance, change always means quite a lot of additional work. So even if you change to reduce bureaucracy, you're changing the arrangements and people need to get used to new arrangements. We know that the government took some moves around assessment, making some changes around S4 assessment to try to reduce testing. But again, because that's a change and the teachers need to get used to that change, and it never quite feels to teachers, I think, that things are getting much easier. I'm sure I would get a nod of the head there. It has always been thus. It has always been that teachers have felt they've got an awful lot of work to do, a lot of paperwork to do, but we're doing our very best to try and help ensure that we don't add to the burden.
Okay, members. Margaret.
Chair, it's just can't let Mark get away without anything, but I would have to say, reading through a lot of the key facts and narratives that have came through the lifelong learning wellbeing part, I think we'd have to say we've achieved those and we've outshone those. Now I know it might sound funny, but usually outliers and percentages are highlighted, and there's some in here at 27% above. So I think we should be commending the staff in there. The education one's good as well, but we like to have a wee moan because that's what we're like. But I will like to thank the staff for the work they've put in this year, and I think they've done well across both services in this report and the social work ones.
Yeah, I think most interesting part of mine and Rosa's job is going around all the various schools and see how this massive departments, directorates, all working together. And I think staff actually appreciate the fact that they are working as a part of a larger organisation. They are doing really good work. So on that basis, can we move to the recommendations? I think 2.1. I think we've reviewed the performance. Can we note 2.2, 2.3, and 2.4? And I think we've scrutinised the exception reporting. We've had an explanation as to what we're going to do in order to tackle that. So can we move on to Item 9 on page 123. This is the 2018 Year of Young People Strategic Plan. So this is part of the Scottish Government's programme of themed years, and 2018 has been identified as the Year of Young People, aimed to inspire Scotland through its young people, celebrating their achievements, valuing their contribution to communities, and creating new opportunities for them to shine locally, nationally and globally. It's an exciting opportunity for the area to co-produce an innovative and dynamic calendar of projects, activities and events to celebrate and showcase young people across the region. This report is presenting members with the area plan for the year for approval, and it's Mark to speak to this, and it is a very good report, and I think we are making a huge amount of progress in this particular area. So Mark, is there anything else you want to add to the report?
Just briefly, Chair, just to say to members that this plan is the result of a number of months' work with our colleagues within third sector organisations, representatives from all directorates in the Council, but most importantly young people, and what's presented to members today is the result of the work that the Youth Project team have taken forward, engaging with young people across the region, and it has also been amended to reflect the views of members at the members' seminar we had a few weeks back that was very well attended. The plan is an ambitious plan for Dumfries and Galloway, which I think reflects our commitment to children and young people in the region, and also I would hope that members are able to see how this reflects activity and projects across the region, providing an equity provision for young people across Dumfries and Galloway, which is very important to us within the CIPL Directorate. And certainly the plan has been very youth driven, and what's presented to members today is the result of that work, including with our members of the Youth Parliament over a number of months. So happy to take questions from members.
Members? Adam?
Thanks, Chair. I'd just like to echo your sentiments. I think this is a very good report, and it's very good news for our region. I would like to thank Mark. I've enjoyed working with him and the young people so far in the creation of this report, and I look forward to, hopefully getting agreement and a really good year next year.
Thanks, Adam. Ivor?
Chair, I'm just wondering, is this the full list of events, or is this just the ones that we are organising? Because I know of another group, at least, who are planning on doing something to involve young people, and it was a sporting activity and actually organising the sport so they get something out of it as well. Can they sort of tag into this as well?
Certainly the idea, Councillor Hislop, is that this is not set in stone. It needs to be an evolving document that things are added to as the year goes on, so we don't lose any opportunities to bring other events, activities for young people in. I think what you mentioned there is very much the picture around the volume and quantity of activities for young people, particularly within areas like sports locally. And what we've had to do so that members weren't presented with a 40 or 50 page plan was put some of them under headings within there around wider sport or health and well-being. But what we do have behind that is a detailed list of activity there, and certainly any organisation who has been involved in the strategic group, where we have over 30 organisations, the content of what they have is within the plan, but some of it is under wider headings just because of the sheer volume, which is testimony, I think, to the sports organisation community groups across Dumfries and Galloway.
No one else indicating they want to speak, so can we move to the recommendation? So can we agree 2.1, the draft plan for the Year of Young People 2018? Yeah. And can we note 2.2, the substantial amount of external funding that has been secured, subject to match funding, being identified and approved? And 2.3, can we note the council funding required to deliver the draft plan, which is £98,000 as detailed at 3.44? And have regard to this information for the development of budget proposals for 2018-19. Right, thank you. So I've no other business deemed urgent. So can we move to item 11, the Local Government Act? Give me a moment. To consider adoption of a resolution to exclude the public from the meeting in terms of section 50A, bracket 4, paragraph 6 of Part 1 of Schedule 7A to the Local Government Scotland Act 1973. Are you in agreement with that? Okay.